She stepped into the upscale boutique, intending to shop. Not to be demeaned, but when the manager dismissed her as someone who wouldn't make a purchase, she gave him a lesson he'd never forget. The air inside La Belle Couture was thick with the scent of polished leather and luxurious perfume, a space where affluence wasn't just flaunted, it was expected. Spotlights illuminated designer handbags, each encased in glass, while meticulously arranged coats lined the walls, their staggering price tags a silent challenge. This was the kind of store where reputation often outweighed wealth. Lorraine Hastings, 72, entered with quiet confidence, the crisp autumn chill fading as the glass doors sealed behind her. She adjusted her pristine cream cashmere coat, one she'd cherished for over a decade, and slipped off her rich brown leather gloves. Her movements were deliberate, her posture regal, eyes scanning the boutique's curated opulence. She had frequented luxury retailers before, but today, something felt off. A young sales associate near the counter flicked a glance her way, crimson nails drumming idly against the glass. She assessed Lorraine with a single look, one quick dismissive pass, before smirking and turning away. Lorraine paid it no mind. She wasn't here for approval. She had spent years shaping young minds in lecture halls, debating intellectuals on world stages, and publishing works read by people she would never meet. She didn't need validation from a girl in her 20s who likely couldn't distinguish real cashmere from a cheap blend. Her gaze landed on a central display, a deep emerald handbag encased in glass, more than just an accessory, but a statement. Before she could approach, subtle movement caught her attention. A security guard, broad-shouldered with an earpiece, adjusted his stance near the entrance. He wasn't openly staring, but Lorraine knew the signs: the calculated shift, the slight head turn, the unnecessary vigilance. She exhaled quietly, choosing not to react. Running her fingers over a row of coats, she savored the craftsmanship: silk linings, hand-stitched seams, artistry that was becoming scarce. She lifted one, inspecting the tag. $3,200. She could buy several without hesitation. But before she even set it back, a voice cut through the air. "Ma'am," the associate called, her tone light yet laced with something Lorraine had encountered far too often. Doubt. Lorraine turned, arching an eyebrow. The girl approached, lips curved into a smile that was more polished than genuine. Her name tag read Vanessa in delicate cursive. "Just so you're aware," Vanessa continued, her voice measured, "those pieces are quite expensive." Lorraine let the word settle, the implication clear. Expensive. As if she hadn't read the price, as if she wasn't standing in Charleston's most exclusive boutique because she belonged there. She felt the weight of unseen gazes, the silent assumptions thick as perfume. The security guard lingered, still but watchful. Lorraine's smile was small, deliberate. "Oh." Her voice was smooth, unwavering. "Should I be looking for the clearance rack instead?" A flicker of unease crossed Vanessa's face. Vanessa recovered swiftly. "Oh no, of course not," she said with a light laugh, but the fleeting glance she shot at the security guard, quick yet unmistakable, revealed more than words ever could. Lorraine caught it, but rather than walking away, rather than giving them the satisfaction, she adjusted her gloves, lifted her chin, and strode deeper into the boutique. They thought they had her figured out. They had no idea. And yet, that wasn't even the most insulting part. She moved through the store with the same poise she carried into boardrooms and lecture halls. She had faced far greater opposition. Young minds eager to challenge authority, intellectuals mistaking arrogance for brilliance, a few dismissive sales clerks. That was nothing. Still, the weight of their silent assumptions pressed around her. Her fingers reached for a navy blue cashmere coat, its cut flawless, every stitch a testament to masterful craftsmanship. But before she could fully grasp the sleeve, another voice entered the conversation. "That particular piece is from our exclusive collection," a second associate chimed in, stepping out from behind the counter. Tall, blonde, mid-40s, the kind of woman who probably vacationed in Aspen and called it charming, Lorraine remained unfazed. "Is that so?" she asked, casually turning the coat over in her hands. Unimpressed but willing to indulge the game, Melissa, according to her name tag, lacked Vanessa's forced enthusiasm. Her expression balanced somewhere between polite dismissal and mild irritation, as if she were humoring someone who had wandered into the wrong place. "Yes," Melissa confirmed. "Hand-stitched in Italy, custom-dyed fibers. We typically reserve these for our high-profile clientele." Not an outright denial, but the message was clear. "You don't belong here." Lorraine traced a button between her fingertips, a slow, knowing smile playing at the edges of her lips. "Well, I suppose that would make me one of your high-profile clients, wouldn't it?" Melissa's brow twitched, so slight it was almost imperceptible, but Lorraine caught it. Before she could respond, Vanessa jumped in, her attempt at damage control clumsy at best. "Oh, no, that's not what we meant," she rushed to clarify, shooting a glance at Melissa before turning back to Lorraine. "It's just that, well, we like to ensure our pieces find the right homes." The right homes. Lorraine felt the familiar sting in her gut, but she refused to let it show. She had spent a lifetime dismantling barriers, becoming the youngest black woman to earn tenure in her department, the only one on countless executive boards, the mentor to students who, like her, had been told what they could and couldn't achieve. And now, here she stood, inside a boutique she owned, being treated like she didn't belong. With deliberate calm, she placed the coat back on the rack, her movements controlled, composed. "I see," she said, pausing. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she added, "Tell me, does the store train you to say that? Or is this a personal touch?" Vanessa went pale, Melissa tensed, and for the first time. The security guard shifted, his stance uneasy. Lorraine was no longer just another customer to dismiss. But before the tension could tighten further, a new presence entered the scene. A man in a tailored suit, his steps precise, his expression carefully composed. Damian Caldwell, the manager. He had the air of someone who had clawed his way up in the industry. Refined taste, yet no true connection to the opulence he curated. His gaze flickered from Lorraine to his staff, absorbing the situation in seconds. "Is there a problem here?" he asked smoothly, though the way his eyes lingered on Lorraine made it clear who he assumed the issue was. Melissa exhaled, visibly relieved. "Not at all, Mr. Caldwell," she assured him. "We were simply explaining to this customer that some of our more exclusive pieces require approval before purchase." Lorraine tilted her head slightly, as if intrigued. "Approval?" she echoed. "And who exactly grants that approval?" Melissa hesitated. Damian answered in her place. "We have protocols, of course," he said, his smile thin but polished. "We like to ensure that serious buyers receive the best experience." There it was, the final confirmation that they had already decided she wasn't one of them. Lorraine let the silence stretch, just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then, with a deliberate ease that only came with authority, she reached into her purse, retrieving her phone. She was done playing along, and they were about to learn exactly who they had underestimated. The boutique fell into an expectant hush, the kind of silence weighted with held breaths. Lorraine tapped her screen, her face unreadable. She wasn't angry. Not yet. She had lived long enough to know that anger was a weapon, best wielded at the perfect moment. Across from her, Vanessa fidgeted, shifting her stance. Melissa, rigid and wary, gripped the counter as though steadying herself, and Damian. Oh, he still wore that well-practiced smile, but in his eyes, a flicker of doubt surfaced. "Ma'am," he offered, his tone smooth, measured. "If you'd like, I'd be happy to recommend some of our more accessible collections. We have a selection of fine scarves and accessories that may better suit your needs." Accessories. As if she had entered looking for a consolation prize, Lorraine exhaled softly, shaking her head with the faintest hint of amusement. Then, scrolling with intent, she found exactly what she needed. "You know," she mused, eyes still on her screen, "I find it interesting how often you use that word." Damien's brow creased slightly. "What word?" Lorraine glanced up, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Serious." A flicker of confusion crossed his features. "Excuse me?" Without a word, she lifted her phone just enough for him to see the display, tilting it toward him with the air of an afterthought. At the top of the email thread, his name, Damien Caldwell, was clearly visible. And the subject line, Performance Review and Annual Store Evaluations, Lorraine watched as Damien's jaw tightened. Across from her, Vanessa and Melissa leaned in slightly, their curiosity momentarily overriding their caution. They couldn't see the screen's details, but they saw his face, and in that instant, they knew something had shifted. Tilting her head, Lorraine kept her tone calm, composed. "You see, I do take my shopping quite seriously," she continued, her voice as smooth as silk, "especially when it comes to stores I own." A flicker of disbelief crossed Damien's face, his eyes darting between the phone and Lorraine. The silence stretched just a beat too long. Melissa blinked. "Wait," she whispered, barely audible. "What do you mean, own?" Lorraine let the moment settle before delivering her answer. "I mean," she said, slipping the phone back into her purse with deliberate ease, "that I sign your paycheck." One heartbeat, then another. Vanessa's hand shot up to cover her mouth. Melissa stiffened, as if rooted to the spot. And Damien. Oh, for the first time, the perfectly rehearsed mask of authority cracked. Lorraine watched as the realization crashed down on them. She had seen it before. That transition from arrogance to sheer panic, the slow unraveling of someone who had just made the worst mistake of their career. But she wasn't finished, not even close. "You didn't know that, did you?" Lorraine mused, her tone light, almost amused. Damien's mouth opened, then snapped shut, then opened again. "Miss Hastings, Dr. Hastings?" she corrected smoothly. Vanessa audibly gulped. Melissa looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Damien took a step back, clasping his hands in front of him. "Of course, Dr. Hastings," he amended hastily, his voice shifting so quickly it was almost pitiful. "Please understand. This is all just a misunderstanding." Lorraine lifted a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said, her tone sharp but controlled. "I understand that the moment I walked through these doors, you decided I wasn't worth your time, that I didn't deserve these clothes or even basic courtesy." She took a step closer, her gaze steady. "And I understand that the only reason you care now is because I have the power to decide whether or not you still have a job tomorrow." Silence. This time, it cut deep. Vanessa had turned ghostly pale. Melissa refused to meet Lorraine's eyes. And Damien, he was sweating now. With a slow, deliberate motion, Lorraine smoothed her coat, adjusted her gloves, then sighed. "But I'm not unreasonable," she continued, "so I'll give you a choice." Damien stilled. "You can either explain to me why I should continue trusting you with my business." She let the weight of her words settle. "Or you can start drafting your resignation letter now." Either way, she was done playing along. The air inside Lavelle Couture had changed. The once smug, indifferent staff now stood frozen, their faces drained of confidence. The balance of power had shifted, and they felt it. Damien Caldwell swallowed hard, struggling to regain control. The polished, self-assured manager who had dismissed Lorraine so easily was now visibly shaken, his hands clenching at his sides. "Dr. Hastings," he began again. Damien's voice was thinner now, stripped of its earlier confidence. "I assure you this was never about you personally," he said quickly. "These policies are in place for all customers." Lorraine lifted an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "All customers?" she echoed, tilting her head slightly. "Tell me something, Damien. How many other customers have you personally approached today to explain these policies?" He hesitated. Too long. Vanessa and Melissa exchanged nervous glances, neither daring to answer for him. Damien started, then stopped. Because they all knew the answer, Lorraine let the silence stretch just enough to make them squirm before shifting her attention. With measured ease, she reached toward the locked display case, her eyes settling on the emerald handbag she had been eyeing earlier. "Open it," she said, tapping a gloved finger against the glass. Damien blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said, open it." Lorraine's voice remained calm, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. Damien fumbled for his keys, his movements no longer crisp and assured. When he finally unlocked the case, he carefully lifted the handbag and held it out to her. His fingers trembled slightly. Lorraine took it without a word, turning it over in her hands. The Italian leather was buttery soft, the stitching flawless. She already knew she would never carry it. It wasn't even her style, but that wasn't the point. She traced the engraved logo with her fingertips, then slowly turned to Vanessa and Melissa. "Would either of you like to suggest a price I can afford?" she asked, her voice as smooth as the silk lining of the handbag. Vanessa visibly recoiled. Melissa shifted uncomfortably, her lips pressed so tightly together they had gone nearly white. "Dr. Hastings, please," Damien interjected, desperation creeping into his voice. "We truly regret any misunderstanding." Lorraine let out a soft, knowing laugh. "A misunderstanding," she mused. "That's interesting." She carefully set the handbag down on the glass counter, her gloved fingers lingering on it just a second longer than necessary. "Because from where I'm standing, Damien, this looks less like a misunderstanding and more like a very clear message." Another weighted pause. Then, in a voice soft, dangerously soft, she asked, "Tell me, what exactly was it about me that made you so sure I wasn't a serious buyer?" Damien visibly paled. Melissa's nails dug into her arms. Vanessa looked like she might cry. "Did Dr. Hastings, Damien stammered, his usual corporate poise crumbling. But Lorraine wasn't interested in excuses. She exhaled slowly, then reached into her purse. But not for her wallet. Instead, she pulled out a sleek, leather-bound notebook. She flipped it open, revealing a printed company letterhead. Damien's breath hitched. "I was going to do this next week," Lorraine said, almost to herself. "But I suppose there's no harm in doing it now." She turned the notebook toward Damien, tapping a finger against the official-looking document. She gestured lightly, her fingers slicing through the air like a blade. "The problem," Lorraine continued, her voice deceptively soft, "is the culture you've cultivated here. The way assumptions are made, the way certain customers like me, are treated as if they don't belong." Damien swallowed hard, his carefully curated persona unraveling with each second. Vanessa's hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides. Melissa's face had gone eerily blank, her eyes fixed on the floor. Lorraine took another slow, deliberate step forward. "You see," she went on, "this isn't about a single handbag. It's not about a misunderstanding. It's about a pattern that's clearly reflected in these reports." She tapped the leather-bound notebook against her palm, the sound crisp in the silence. "A pattern that I have the power to correct?" Damien's breath hitched. He knew exactly what she meant. This wasn't just about today. This wasn't just about him. This was about the very foundation of Lavelle Coutra's reputation. "I have to say, Damien," Lorraine mused, tilting her head slightly, "you've made my decision very easy." His mouth opened, then shut, his throat bobbing with another nervous swallow. "Dr. Hastings, please." But Lorraine had already turned, shifting her focus to the rest of the boutique. Every employee, every passing customer, every carefully arranged display. They all seemed frozen in place, caught in the aftershock of her words. "You all might want to take a good long look at what just happened here," she announced, her voice carrying through the boutique with quiet authority. Vanessa flinched, Melissa inhaled sharply, Damien's complexion had gone ghostly pale. "Because change," Lorraine added, sliding her notebook back into her purse, "is coming." And with that she adjusted her coat, turned on her heel, and strode towards the exit. She didn't need to look back to know the weight of her words had landed. She didn't need to see Damien's expression to know that his world had just tilted off its axis. And she certainly didn't need their permission to walk out of her store, with her head held high. The door swung shut behind her with a satisfying click, and inside Lavelle Coutra, the silence was deafening. "They'll tell you it's just the way things are," Lorraine continued, her voice quieter now but no less firm. "That it's harmless, that it's just business. But let me ask you something, Vanessa." The young woman swallowed, her hands tightening together. "Yes?" Lorraine tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "If I hadn't been who I am, if I didn't own this store, would you be out here right now?" Vanessa flinched, her lips parting as if to answer, but no words came. Lorraine nodded as if she already knew the answer. "That's what you need to sit with, not just today, not just because of me, but because of what it means for every other person who walks through those doors." Vanessa's breath shuddered out, and for the first time, she didn't try to argue. She just stood there, the weight of Lorraine's words pressing down on her. "I don't need an apology," Lorraine said, adjusting her coat. "Apologies don't change anything. What I do need is for you to decide who you want to be when no one's watching." Vanessa's brows pulled together, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "Because that's the real test," Lorraine continued, "not how you act when someone with power is standing in front of you, but how you treat the ones you think don't have any." For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Then Vanessa nodded. Small at first, but with growing certainty. "I understand," she whispered. Lorraine studied her for a moment, then gave a small, approving nod. "Good." Without another word, she turned and walked toward her car, her heels clicking against the pavement. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The lesson had already been learned, and inside Lavelle Coutra, change had already begun. As Lorraine disappeared from sight, the air inside Lavelle Coutra remained thick with the aftermath of her presence. No one dared speak. The store, once a stage for exclusivity and silent judgments, now felt exposed, its polished facade cracked open for all to see. Damien finally exhaled, his hands still trembling. He had spent years perfecting his carefully curated image, the controlled power of his position, the quiet authority that made people lower their eyes when he spoke. But today, he had been the one forced to look down. Melissa let out a shaky breath, gripping the edge of the counter. "This is bad," she murmured. Damien said nothing. What was there to say? Lorraine Hastings had not raised her voice, had not resorted to anger, yet she had wielded more power in a few quiet sentences than any executive meeting he'd ever attended. Vanessa stepped back inside, her face still pink with emotion. She met Melissa's gaze for only a moment before turning away. Something had changed in her. Not just fear, but an awareness she hadn't possessed before. Outside, the world carried on, Pedestrians strolled by, unaware of the reckoning that had taken place within those walls. But inside La Coutre, the lesson lingered, because respect isn't a courtesy. It's a mirror, and today everyone had been forced to see their reflection.